doody, my name is Cameron, better known as Venus Theory, and in this video I'm here to show you around the new Ohmicide-S plugin from the fine folks over at ohmforce. Ohmicide-S is a powerful sound shaping utility that goes beyond simple distortion by bringing the classic Ohmicide plugin into the next generation of audio processing tools. Simultaneously acting as a processor for shaping the color, texture, and dynamics of your sound, it can be used for everything from music production to detailed sound design applications, or to just completely annihilate a sound beyond belief. Featuring 111 different distortions, 7 stages of processing, deep modulation possibilities, and a suite of other features, Ohmicide-S represents a new experience in distortion from ohmforce. The best way to get started with Ohmicide-S is to experience it, and the fastest way to do that is probably with the factory presets. There are over 100 factory presets included, and these are also sorted into various banks in the right-hand side of the preset browser, with each preset also having its own additional instructions and details. The nice part about this is, as complex as Ohmicide-S is, the presets on their organization make it pretty quick to just get started making noise. Once you load a preset, you can get started by refining it using the 4 macros in the lower left of the interface here. These macros are set at suggested values by default, but they offer a quick way to tweak a preset by controlling a range of complex parameters with a single knob. I've loaded this preset onto this synth sound here, and as we bring it in, we can start shaping the sound with the gain, tone, texture, and type. To further refine the response of Ohmicide-S, you might want to adjust some of the global controls in the interface. Above the macros, you'll see these here. We can adjust the input trim amount, the dry-wet blend, the ADSR sensitivity, ADSR density, and output levels. It's worth noting that these are actually global values, so as I adjust these and switch through different presets, you'll notice that they stay at the same position in that instance of Ohmicide-S. The input trim here in particular is worth adjusting since Ohmicide-S has dynamic compensation for each distortion algorithm inside of it, so that means you can avoid a loud is better sort of effect happening as you work your way through different sounds. This parameter really lets you focus in on the sweet spot for the input signal being processed, and it'll be set even as you swap between different presets since it's part of the global controls. Making our way through the rest of the interface, we could take a deeper look at how a sound is built inside of Ohmicide-S. Each preset in Ohmicide-S is made up to 7 bands of signal processing. These bands are the pre-band, the X-band, which can be used to process the low sub-frequencies of a signal, bands 1, 2, 3, and 4, which define frequency-specific processing, and the post-band. Within this same window, oversampling can be enabled, as well as the parallel routing mode, which also displays a diagram of the signal flow. Each of these bands are actually pretty flexible. We can adjust their individual level, we can adjust the crossover points for frequency-specific bands, and we can bypass, solo, or mute specific bands with the B, S, and M toggles down at the bottom. Below that window, you'll also see the individual band settings where we can adjust things like the noise gate, the feedback, the filter, and the output. The filter is actually quite powerful. If we open up the menu here, you'll see it's actually a multi-mode filter. So we have a peak, low pass, band pass, and high pass filter. The output mode has some additional controls as well. In this menu, you'll see the option to swap between panning mode and mid-side mode. Now, since all of this is defined individually for each of the 7 processing bands, I'm sure you can imagine this is already a pretty disgusting amount of sound possibilities, and that's before we even get into any of the distortions. But not all bands need to be used, and that's probably worth noting. If you just want a basic single band distortion, you could just use the pre or post module to create a quick distortion effect. Each band can have its own distortion type set with the type selector below the gain knob in the center of the interface, here. Here we can choose from any of the 37 different distortion types, which range from more subtle things like soft clipping and fuzz to more extreme distortions, all the way up to some pretty bizarre concoctions that go beyond normal description. If you want to quickly audition distortions, you can also use the mouse wheel while hovering over the distortion types. This same mouse wheel behavior is also applicable to most other controls within Ohmicide-S as well, making it a pretty fast navigation experience and a nice way to quickly audition different settings. Once you've selected a distortion type, you can use the gain knob to adjust the amount of distortion. Each of these distortions can be further tweaked between 3 different modes below the main selector here. First, there's standard, which acts as the raw distortion algorithm and is generally a little bit lighter on the CPU. Then we have XXX mode, which is an enhanced and more analog sounding distortion. And finally, there's odd mode here, which uses the bias knob to tune the distortion's harmonics. Combining the 37 different distortion algorithms with these 3 modes, that brings us to a total of 111 different total distortions, with each having additional sound shaping controls. Each distortion features additional controls for the shape, body, mod, and bias. The shape here controls the dynamics of this signal. To the left, you'll find it compresses things a bit more, whereas to the right, it acts as a dynamic expander, introducing additional dynamics, which makes it a little more percussive sounding. To the right of that, you'll find the body control, and the body control acts as a complementary adjustment to the shaper. Body will adjust the amount of shaping that occurs to the signal, while also adding additional limiting as it increases in value. In the lower left, we have the mod control, and this one's a little bit different. The mod control is a custom control relative to each type of distortion that will alter its character in some way. In some cases though, as with the noise algorithm for example here, the mod control won't be available, and in this case you'll see it's grayed out in the interface. If you're ever not sure what the mod control is doing, you'll see a description with the distortion algorithm available at the top window here. In this case, it's adding additional asymmetry and harmonics for a richer sound. All that brings us to the final control, which is bias in the lower right of the distortion area here. Bias adjusts the DC offset before the distortion is applied to a signal. This control can emulate things like a slightly broken circuit or even a circuit bent device, and also add some additional interest and color to the harmonics of a signal. If we adjust this as we play, you can hear what it's doing. So there's quite a bit of sonic range available from just that single control, and it's going to act a little bit differently on each distortion algorithm. While bias has the same basic behavior for standard and XXX modes, the odd mode is a little bit different. In the odd mode, this control will turn into a special frequency shifter that affects the sound pre-distortion and then shifts it back. With some additional modulation from the modulation section or something like the macros or even MIDI or automation in your DAW, this is a great way to create some interesting sweeps and other growling, moving textures. Moving on, let's have a talk about modulation in Ohmicide-S, and this is probably some of the most powerful stuff in this plugin. Ohmicide-S features a deep modulation system with 8 available modulation sources and 4 assignable macros. All of these modulators are independently adjustable. Taking a look at just a single modulator here, we can see that modulators can be set between a variety of different shapes, from LFOs and noise to things like envelopes, dynamic envelope followers, and even a step sequencer. Assigning modulation in Ohmicide-S is really straightforward. Let's say we want to do something basic like adjust the gain of the pre-band here. We can click the gain and increase the modulation depth from this first modulation source. You'll even see this is visually reflected within the user interface of the plugin. Each of these different modulation types will feature its own respective set of controls relative to the type of modulation that it offers. It's worth noting though that these controls can also be modulated themselves. Let's say we want to add some additional modulation here, like increasing the frequency of this first modulator using the first macro. To do this, we'll click the period here and then hit select, which has now targeted this parameter for modulation. Then we'll use the first macro to decrease the period or frequency, which should make it faster. Now, as I increase macro 1, we should hear that LFO starting to speed up. As you can probably imagine, this allows for some extremely complex modulation setups. As you can probably guess, the macros can be assigned here with their respective colors to the right of the 8 available modulation sources. These macros can also have their response shaped to create custom adjusted curves for assigned destinations, or even be set to create sequential modulation based off the position of a macro knob. With these macro shapers, you can actually do some pretty powerful assignments. Let's say in this preset, we want to increase the gain using macro 1. Now, as we do this, we can hear there's a lot of high-end information that gets introduced. And let's say we don't necessarily want that. We want the aggression, but not the fizzy top frequencies. Using the filter, we can select a low-pass filter and increase its mix. Then we'll select the cutoff for additional automation with the macro. Using the first macro, I'm going to decrease the cutoff to about 50%. Now, going back, as we increase macro 1, it's going to decrease the cutoff all the way down to 50% the entire time we move the macro. But I don't think that feels right. I think this sound feels good up until about 60% of the assigned range. Using the shaper, we can increase this to about 60% of the macro's value. Now, as I reset the macro, you'll see that it's only going to start kicking in on that filter when it gets above about 60%. As you go about designing new sounds with Ohmicide-S or browsing the presets, if you ever want to see what parameter is assigned to modulation, you can right-click it and see any macros or modulation assignments. Needless to say, there's quite a bit to explore inside of Ohmicide-S, and to show you a couple case use applications, I wanted to show Ohmicide on a synthesizer, some drums, a guitar, doing some sound design work, and using it as a bus processor. A synthesizer's second best friend outside of reverb is probably distortion, and Ohmicide-S is great on synth lines. Here we've got a basic acid synth going. And just using one of the factory presets, organic drum saturation here, we can start to elevate some detail out of the sound and give it a little bit of bite and crunch, which always works well with acid synths. As we go in and start dialing things like the response and the macros, we can almost entirely reshape the tone of this synth line. And that's actually a pretty powerful thing, especially in the context of a mix, to entirely reshape a sound with just, I guess, 5 controls we touch there. As a case use for drums, here's a drum mix of a track I was working on. And in context with the rest of the track, it sounds like this. Sort of a dark, sludgy thing, and I found Ohmicide-S, especially in parallel, to be really adept at processing drums. This is a preset I made called Hot Drums, which is just gently distorting each of the bands. And by blending this in with the dry-wet control, we can lift up a lot of interesting room sound out of the drums instead of using a compressor. And I think it adds a lot of sonic interest while still maintaining the dynamic character of the drums. If we take a listen to increasing this control in the context of the mix, I think you'll hear how it really makes the drums stand out. Of course, if there's one thing Distortion loves more than synthesizers, it's probably guitar tones. And if you're like me and like writing ridiculously, brutally heavy guitar lines, Ohmicide-S is perfect as a pre- or post-amplifier distortion utility. Here we have a track where we're going to double track a guitar line, just a quick riff, and I've got it set up with 2 different guitar tones in the left and right, and currently it sounds like this. which isn't too bad, but it could use a little more bite to really push it over the edge into that aggressive modern metal territory. To punch things up, before both amps I put an instance of Ohmicide-S. In the left I have a preset I made called Stoned Fuzz, where I'm running a fuzz as a single band in the pre into the amplifier. Then on the right I did the same thing, same preset, but I switched the mode over to Harder. Both of these are pretty heavy, and now the guitar tone sounds like this. So let's lay down a second guitar track and finish this riff out. And I think that is pretty ridiculously heavy. For post-production and sound design, Ohmicide-S is also really useful as a sort of sonic annihilator or ultra-loudinator. In this session, I was doing some sound design work for a movie trailer effects library, and I had some big hits I designed that were already pretty ridiculous and loud. But the client wanted them even bigger and even louder. Within Ohmicide-S, I went into the factory presets and found this one called Industrial Drums Tightened and just tweaked it a little bit, and that turns the sound into this. Which is absolutely ridiculous and totally over the top, but also kind of awesome, and the client loved it. As a bus processor, Ohmicide-S is actually surprisingly adept at just adding a little bit of color and sonic richness to a mix. In the demo track you heard at the intro of this video, I'm actually using Ohmicide-S on the master bus with this preset, Multiband Console. Mostly using the macro controls, I was able to shape the overall tone of the mix, and I'll bring it in using the dry-wet control here to let you hear how it affects everything. So you'll hear, similar to using it on that drum mix, it's a nice way to elevate some additional detail out of the mix, with saturation being used as almost a different type of compression, while also enhancing a little bit of the punch and depth of things like the kick. And that has been a look at Ohmicide-S from ohmforce. We are just barely scratching the surface of what's possible inside of Ohmicide-S here in this video, but I'll leave all the fun of exploring the rest of it up to you. Ohmicide-S is available now, and if you want to check it out for yourself or find more information, you can do so with the links down in the description below. That's it, so thank you for watching. Thanks to ohmforce for having me on the channel here. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and of course, as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.